On the Jacob Buer Show today, I'm so happy to have on cryptocurrency expert Chris Larsen. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. So take us through, where did the entrepreneurial journey start for you at a young age?
Yeah, I mean, it probably started when I was, I guess, 15. I actually had a auto dent repairing company in my front yard. So that was my first taste. And there's good things and bad things about having your own business. Bad is when your customers don't pay you. But it's nice to be your own boss. So I guess that's when I got the bug.
Awesome. And for you, would you ever imagine yourself working for somebody else, or has it just always been something where, you want to run the company yourself? Um, Kind of what's that been like for you running your own companies over the last few years? You've now had three startups that have all succeeded in great places. So what's that kind of been like for you?
Well, I had many jobs where I had bosses. Boy, I think I had just about every odd job you can imagine. So I do know what it's like to work in an organization. Yeah, and I never really felt great having a boss. So I guess you can maybe call that a character flaw. I do like being the designer of my own destiny, and that's what's so great about having a business. But even with all the stress you've got to put up with, especially in those early days, when you don't have money, you don't know where you're going to get the money. You're getting told no all over the place. I mean, it's incredibly stressful. You don't sleep, you don't eat. Um, but in the end, I mean, it's like there's nothing like it, and there's nothing like it, in the country we live in, right? We live in a country of entrepreneurs. America is business, so this is where you want to be if you're entrepreneurial.
Correct. Land of free markets. And obviously, you mentioned sleep. If you don't mind me asking, what was it like in the early days? Would you say you got 6 hours of sleep or even less than that in your early entrepreneurial days?
The 6 years would have been great. No, I mean you're talking two hours. I mean, always just sleep deprived. I would say this though, I didn't do a very good job of trying to figure out sleep, and sleep is really important. Now I sleep great, but I spent time, figuring it out and getting to a routine. So, look, as an entrepreneur, these are like athletic events, right? You gotta take care of your body and mind, or you're just not going to be effective. So yeah, it was not a good thing. I think this is pretty common, especially in the first couple years when the stress is just overwhelming and you just can't shut the mind off. But it is something entrepreneurs need to pay attention to. Eating right, exercise, sleeping. This is why it helps to have a co-founder, by the way. I always found having a co-founder, they're the only ones that understand what you're going through, and that way you can sort of, commiserate with each other, and you could trade off when one is, got full speed, full capabilities, and the other might be overly stressed. So I think it's always great to have two co-founders, never more than two co-founders, though. Three is like 3D chess; it never works.
Wow. Well, thank you for explaining that because I've interviewed several entrepreneurs and they've never mentioned that impact right there. I know you're a very busy man and I only have a few more minutes, but what is something that, looking back, you would do differently if there was anything that you would do differently? I mean, obviously, a lot of people could look and say everything turned out very well for you, but would there be any small things you would do differently if you were 19, 20, 21?
Well, yeah, I think spend more time in the early days of making sure you get the team, an awesome team, the team that you need to succeed. Your instincts early on are just kind of like taking anybody that's going to be part of your vision. And that can hurt you, right? So I think this is what Elon does really well, by the way, the greatest entrepreneur in the history of the world. He builds the right team from the early days. Even if it's more expensive, even if it's harder to recruit, take the time to get the right people. If and when you don't have the right person, when you know that, don't let them on, right? Or if you realize it later, make sure you separate from them, right? So this is all about your team.
Which goes into our next topic that I wanted to discuss real quickly, which was what does it take to run big companies? Because obviously we kind of mentioned how you start. You mentioned the hustle, the grind, how you don't get sleep, how you should never have more than two or three co-founders. But what is it like once you've made it and then you have thousands and thousands of employees or hundreds of employees? What's that leadership like in your opinion, from your aspect?
Well, yeah, so it's a great question. I think number one, you have to recognize what kind of person are you? So are you the kind of person that can, do the early startup, which is about basically reality suspension, right? You're doing something that no one's done, and everybody you talk to will say, that's a stupid idea that will never work, right? So you have to be able to withstand that. That's a certain type of person. When you get bigger, though, what you're talking about, that's very different. That's product market fit. That's now OKRs, your objectives and your goals, and then managing to them and holding people accountable. That's a completely different world. And I recognized early on, I'm good at the first part and I'm terrible at the second part. So what I did at Ripple, for example, is in 2016, after we were around for 5 years, recognized, okay, we're at that point of product market fit. I need somebody who's really good at that second part. And that's why I brought on Brad Garlinghouse. And I stepped down and became controlling shareholder, but executive chair. So I think very few people, maybe Bill Gates, right, Elon Musk, who can do both. But I think that's a rare person.
Very true. And just three last quick, I like to call them fireball questions. Was there an entrepreneur that has inspired you? I mean, you mentioned Elon Musk, but obviously, going back from your early days, long before he was, at the top. Was there somebody who like inspired you, like a John D. Rockefeller or anybody like that?
Yeah, actually, look up Hank Greenberg. That's the AIG guy, right? AIG obviously went through lots of issues in the financial crisis, but look at back the early history of that company and what he did. That's an incredible individual. So somebody like that.
Awesome. And then two last ones. What is something that you enjoy doing in your spare time? Because obviously you got to have a work-life balance.
That's right. Absolutely. I love restoring old cars. So I've restored two cars now with both of my sons. So I like cars from the 60s. We take them all the way from, the frame all the way up, and that's a blast. So we're in our second one of those. We're 2 years in. It'll be a 3-year project. Total joy.
And then, kind of my last question before I close with advice is what is something that you're proud to support now that you're able to, maybe a philanthropic cause or something like that?
Yeah, so I spent most of my time now on climate change, which is actually a very fun area to work on because we're in an energy transition where renewables in many cases are less expensive than fossil fuels. So now you are starting to see these things take off, regardless of the administration. I know it's going to change a little bit with this administration, but the world is well on its way to an energy transition, the likes of which we haven't seen in 130 years, right? So pretty darn exciting. Tons of money to be made, and we'll have a better planet for it.
For sure. And then I always like to close with this one. And by the way, I noticed, for yourself, you had supported Harris, but you had also supported Republican who ran against Liz Warren. So you're somebody that will work with people who have good ideas. So I really respect that about you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
in
I'm
the
sorry. Go ahead.
closeout, what advice? I always like to just hit the hammer with this question when I close. What advice would you have if there's anything else you'd like to provide? And this just doesn't go for young people, anybody who listens and sees this interview. What advice would you have for them on the term of passion? That's how I like to close.
Well, yeah, don't do things. Look, I know in the early days when we don't have money, I never had money in the early days. You have to take jobs you don't want. But as far as your passion and what you're going to really call your life's journey, don't do anything you're not wildly excited and passionate about. You cannot be successful if you're not passionate about something.
Really appreciate you sharing that. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining the show today, and we hope to see you around.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.